So listen, welcome everyone
Why did they leave?
to the art of canning. It's a practice that can basically stretch your growing season, all right, as well as your budget. So I had asked before, we had all the IT issues for those of you that are remote. How many of you out there can? And there was a showing of, I think, one individual. So for those of you that haven't canned, hopefully when we get to the end of this presentation, you'll have an understanding about the basic tools that you'll need if you decide to go ahead and start doing some canning on your own. So as is the case with the other presentations, if you wouldn't mind forwarding, thank you. The presentation was created by my better half, Susan. I've had the privilege of canning with her now for, the last 14 years. We took this year off from growing any vegetables. We're giving the garden a rest. So what are we going to learn today? Basically, we're going to learn the art of canning, or some pretty basic essential stuff with canning, all right, as well as why all of us should start doing it. What are some common foods that we could use if we decide to go ahead and do canning, as well as what tools that we need. So I brought some tools here with me today because I think demos are really helpful for those of you that haven't done any canning in the past. It just, other than listing it on the slide, a picture's almost worth 1,000 words, as you can understand. So different types of canning methods. So my wife presented two, or I'll be presenting two here that my wife listed. Water bath canning, as well as pressure cooker canning method. There's another one, which is a steam canner. We've used it in the past. It uses a very small little bit of water on the bottom. She didn't list it because it's not as common as the pressure cooker or the standard water bath canner. Also, a few recipes and then some resources. Okay? Right? So she loves to put these quotes in all of her presentations. So this was, I guess, from a foodie, or Barbara Kingsolver. She says, I think of my canning as fast food paid for in the time up front. So for those of you out there that can, we all know it's I would be lying if I told you it isn't an arduous, exhausting thing to do canning, because it is, especially if you have a whole lot of product that's coming out of your garden. It usually requires a solid day, perhaps multiple days, say 2 days in a row, depending on the volume and everything that you're going to do, but certainly it's well worth it. So what it means in our modern age, basically, to do canning. So during the summer season, usually our gardens put out way more product than we're able to eat, all right, in that summer season. So the question is what can we do with those products other than just, hopefully, for those of you that participate in the composting seminar, throw them in a compost pile, or, if your relatives and everybody said they're squashed out, they don't want any more cucumbers or whatnot, and your neighbors don't want any, because that's happened to us. This canning basically just gives you a way to store those products so that you and your spouse and your family can enjoy them later during that season, if you will. Maybe late fall, during the winter, early spring. So if you're growing your own or gathering it from local farmers, it's just a great way, again, to sort of extend that shelf life of that product. So typically she's saying here that you can keep those canned products for 1 to 2 years. They tell you that if you're canning, you should basically get rid of it, in that 1 to 2 year time frame. I can tell you, when we've done canning, we've literally eaten pickles and they've been at like 3+ years, and they're fine. And the way that you know that they're fine is when you go and you open that jar with the lid, you hear this really evident, just sharp, air seal pop, if you will. And then usually the vegetable will still be pretty firm. If it's a pickle or what have you, it hasn't gone soft or limp or anything, so it's still fine. It maybe isn't as great as it was, let's say, within year 1 or year 1.5, but certainly you can still go ahead and consume that. Virtually any fruit, vegetable, or meat can be canned, and we're going to go over sort of the different pressure cookers and which would be applicable depending on what it is that you are deciding to can. So questions on any of that? Nothing yet. It's all pretty much straightforward stuff, right? So certainly canning extends sort of that nutrient density of the food. So when you're harvesting those products and you're canning them, they're sort of at their peak for ripeness. And unlike, how do you say, processed, manufactured, canned fruits and vegetables, which are still all right. I can tell you from our experience, they don't taste nearly as wonderful as the things that we can and process ourselves. So whether or not that means that they're processing foods that aren't 100% ripe, now maybe a lot of manufacturers are doing that and they're throwing in a lot of underripe stuff with ripe stuff and putting them in those large vats for mass-produced canning. Just a big difference between those things that we do versus those things that we're purchasing. So, thank you, Clicker. So why can? What's the importance of preserving our food? So typically, for those of us that are passionate about growing our own food or whatever, we know where the source is. So we know where the food's coming from. It's not a question, all right? So we know what we added to the garden or what have you, amendments or whatnot, to create that wonderful food stuff, if you will. Connection was lost, sorry. Yeah. Also, it's retaining those nutrient values, certainly extending the shelf life, as I had said, for about a year or 2 years, longer in fact. There's a cost savings associated with canning, and those cost savings are just sort of paid for in time and effort, I guess, when you're canning. But there's definitely a cost savings versus going to the marketplace. Certainly, as I had mentioned a moment before, the flavor's remarkable, as well as meal prep time saver. So usually when we're processing our tomatoes, we'll do quarts and quarts and quarts of tomato sauce. This is just an enameled canning vessel, if you will, stock pot that we use for water bath canning as well as making spaghetti sauce. So those of you that are out there can't see it, but on the bottom of this, it's burned, which means it's fine for making sauce, but it's no longer any good for canning. So you can't water bath can or anything like that if the base or what have you of the vessel has any sort of pitting or burning or stuff like that, because all of that could permeate the canning process as you're trying to seal those jars. So it's just good information, and I kind of went ahead of myself, but since I picked this up, I figured I'd say it then.
What about the white?
What's that?
What about the white that goes, my water creates this white, and I can't get it off my
Yeah, so more likely than not you have a well at your home. Yeah, so you have a lot of manganese and probably iron in your water, so you're going to get scaling whenever the water's really hot. So that's really just mineral scale. That's fine, that's not a problem. It's when all of a sudden the bottom of the enamel starts to get burnt, and then that enamel's separating or what have you, it's charred on the bottom. Fine for a sauce, as I told you. You know, we scrub the heck out of this if we're making, this holds I think 40 or 50 quarts. No, this is 34, so I didn't bring the big one. So you know, we make usually double this or triple this. So we have a 50 quart and then usually 2 of these on the stove too. So it's a whole lot of spaghetti sauce or tomato sauce. And that cuts down on the meal prep because, well, it's already done. You're opening the jar, you're going to add your seasoned beef or whatever if you want to add some ground beef to it, and then you're just throwing that in a pan and warming it up. Certainly there's environmental concerns that a lot of us have. If, you know, that's why we go ahead and decide to can our own products, and just the personal satisfaction of doing so. Yeah. So another foodie statement here, this is from Better Homes and Gardens. Canned tomatoes are like summer saved, all that sun-kissed flavor, you know, ready to be enjoyed whenever you want it, basically. So that's pretty awesome. You know, she's speaking here as far as canned tomatoes, but for me, you know, I think early or late winter, early spring, where it's still cold, we put up a good amount of tomato soup. And to me, nothing's better than, you know, a grilled cheese sandwich with some homemade tomato soup. You know, so when I pop that open or whatever and put it in a small pot, you know, that for me is sort of similar to this. So if you can advance that. So common foods for canning, obviously, tomatoes and beans, they can be turned into sauce, salsa, whole, diced, crushed. She didn't list here ketchup, tomato paste. So there's still a whole lot more product up there for tomatoes that you can do. She didn't list the ketchup and the tomato paste because that takes forever to make tomato paste out of fresh tomatoes. It's not impossible, it's just you have to cook it down, cook it down, cook it down, get rid of so much of the water to create that paste. And really, ketchup is made with tomato paste. For any of you that have made homemade ketchup, it requires paste, which means you're making paste to make ketchup. which takes a long time. And then any kind of beans into whole or stewed. Certainly, cukes and peas turned into all sorts of different varieties of pickles, all right, as well as just putting whole peas in. Fruits, jams, pie fillings, juices, sauces. We don't, I shouldn't say that. I mean, I do grape jam. We don't really do fillings or pie fillings or anything like that. For a lot of those things, I think it's almost easier if you're going out and you're picking, say, fresh blueberries when they're ripe. Put them in a freezer bag, make sure they're all the air's out, and then sort of freeze that. I don't believe there's much time in sort of taking a fruit and making a fruit filling for a pie. It's really just adding the sugar and then that and putting it in. But certainly if you were to make jams, that does take time because it takes a whole lot longer on the stove to sort of get that ball state, sugar state, so you're going to end up with a jam versus a syrup for ice cream. So at least it doesn't go bad, because if it doesn't make a jam, then you have plenty of syrup for your ice creams in the winter. So beets and carrots, you can slice them, you can pickle them. For those of you that attended the fermenting class, certainly you can make fermented foodstuffs with all of that too as a means of preserving. That isn't really doing canning with these two methods, but again, it's just a way of preserving those foodstuffs. So, thank you. Yeah. What's that? Yeah. So, some basic tools here that you need. Mason jars with lids, bands, and the amount needed for the recipe. So I brought some samples here of the mason jars. So basically you can get half-gallon mason jars, quart mason jars. I think you can even get gallon mason jars. Those are massive. I wouldn't recommend it. So the quarts, actually a lot of these will come in a wide mouth as well as a narrow mouth. I can tell you here and now, if you're planning on doing anything as far as like stewed tomatoes, whole tomatoes, anything other than sauces, you're better off with wide mouth jars than the narrow mouth. It just makes them easier for filling. And then from there, you can go down into pints and half pints and even quarter pints. So these are pretty common sizes that most people that can will use. All right. Utensils. So funnel, jar lifter, magnetic lifter. So this funnel here was from Susan's mother's mother. So that's what she uses. Susan's mom never learned how to do it. She didn't care because, Campbell's came out and all this other stuff when she started doing her family. So anyway, it was nice that Mom saved this because now Susan and I use it. So it's sort of like one of those pass-me-down things. So funnel, jar lifter, terribly essential, and I'll go over why. That magnetic lid lifter, if you will. A cooling rack, which this is just one that came out of our pressure cooker. The cooling rack is not so much for putting it on your countertop here to cool the jars. This is really for putting in the base of whatever you're going to use for your pot for canning. All right? Because what happens is if you put these mason jars in the bottom of the canner and there isn't that rack and those jars are hitting the metal on the bottom, you're going to crack them. They're going to basically explode and you wasted however much product you put in all those mason jars. So that's the purpose for that cooling rack. The thing that she didn't add here, which I brought anyway, this is sort of just like a small little tongue depressor, but it isn't. What it does is, let's say for instance you're doing, really if you're canning anything, what you want to try to do is you want to get whatever air pockets are inside that mason jar out before you continue to process it and put it in your canner. All right, and the way you do that is you use a plunger like this and you're just going around the perimeter of the mason jar that you're using, making sure you're giving that air an opportunity to vent to the surface before you're going to go ahead and process it, either in your pressure cooker or in your canning vessel. Okay? So she shows here a stock pot, so a large stock pot, 21 quart. This sort of shows you a smaller version of what we do when we're doing our sauce. So this example here is just a water bath canner, and that's one of those two big pots here like this. And then you can see the sauce on the other side. All right, a small saucepan. Usually we use like a 2-quart saucepan. It's really just a vessel that you can go ahead and put the lids in because the lids are going to need some prep as far as pre-tempering before you go ahead and use them. All right, questions on that? And I'm going to go over it here as we continue anyway. So, all right, so if you wouldn't mind putting that forward. So what are some common canning methods? There's two methods which are frequently used. I brought those two examples here. One is just a water bath canning method. It's really the most common for those that are beginning to do canning. Excuse me, I need a drink, sorry. So the water bath method works great for any foodstuffs that are high in acidity. So all of your tomatoes and things like that work great in a water bath canner, okay? Really does. Pressure canning method, that's different. So all of the low acidity foods, so all of your fruits, your vegetables, really work well in a pressure cooker. I would make the argument that so do the acidic, because really the whole reason why we bought that Goliath of a pressure cooker was, what the pressure cooker does is, let's say for instance if we were to do tomato sauce in this water bath canning vessel, all right? Usually we would have to process this for about 45 minutes with the water at a slow boil, all right? With that pressure cooker, it's half the time. So if you're putting up, let's say 200 plus quarts of sauce, and you just cut your time down by 50%, that means that maybe you can do it in like a really long day versus like doing it all day and then getting up the next morning and continuing doing it more. All right? So that's where a pressure cooker can really come in handy. But again, it's all volume driven. Okay? So, yeah. There you go. So water bath canning method, step by step. So first you got to do some prep work, all right? So what are the instructions basically telling you need, all right? You got to gather all the equipment, pretty much everything that I have here on this table, you're going to need to gather up before you begin. And then you're going to have to wash all the lids, jars, and bands. So I didn't show you guys this, but frequently you can buy pre-boxed rims and lids. So a box like this, typically there's 12 lids and bands. So they come out like this. So all of these would have to be washed before you go ahead and use them for your canning. So a light wash with just dish soap is fine. The same holds true for all of your mason jars or whatever you're planning on putting the product in. Okay? A shortcut to washing, which we've done for those of you that have dishwashers, and again, it's all volume or time driven. We will fill our dishwasher up with all the quart jars that we're planning on using, and we'll run it on a short cycle with hot heat, and then we'll throw the rims in there as well. These you don't ever want to put in high heat because basically the sealant that's on the underside, you don't ever want that to get too hot because it's not going to make a good seal and seal your product. So the lids you could never put in a dishwasher. We usually just put those in a pan in the sink with light dish soap, gently wash them and then rinse them well and place them on a towel, all right? But a dishwasher works great for washing all of the jars and everything as well as the bands. And then in fact, you can leave them in the dishwasher because they're going to stay warm when you decide to do your canning. All right, and I'll kind of go over why that's pretty critical a little later on. I'll let you know what happened to me one time. So, you're going to want to fill the pots, all right? So if you're using a water canning method like this, you're basically going to want to fill it at least half full, as Susan says here. Bring the water to a boil and then just reduce the heat so that you're trying to keep that water bath hot. But it doesn't need to be a rolling boil, okay? The jars, you're going to inspect them, make sure there's no nicks, cracks, or chips. Typically, you'll find those like on the base of the jar, or you'll find them here where the band gets tied on as well as the lid. If you notice that there's any sort of imperfection, you're better off using it for a water glass or a milk jug or a soda thing or a lemonade thing, but don't use it for canning. Because what will happen is you'll go and you'll try to process and next thing you know it's cracked while it's in that water bath processing. And if it cracks in the water bath, you need to basically take everything out once it's done for the appropriate time, wash it all out, wash all of these once they've cooled, and then you got to go put more water in, heat it up, and start all fresh and new again. So it's just like a hard lesson. You don't want to do it. I can't stress it enough. Okay? So she says here, place the clean jars upright in the canning pot and boil for 10 minutes. That's sort of the standard way to do it if you're not going to use your dishwasher. So once you have this full of water that's hot, usually we'll use our jar lifter like this, take it like that, so that you're basically grabbing it, and we'll put it in here so that it starts to fill with that hot water, and then you're just going to rest it on that cooling rack in the base of that water cannon. All right? So you're going to do that with all of the jars, and then you're going to boil that for 10 minutes just to make sure the jars are sterilized if you're not going to use the dishwasher. Okay? Lids and bands. So place lids right side up in a small pan. Right side up is pretty evident. So the chrome colored or the gold colored, they're only gold or chrome colored. That side you want up in your little saucepan. All right, after you've pre-washed them, that little, say, 2-quart pan that you have on your stove when you're going to do your canning, you want to try to put all of these sort of like just drop them in so they sort of nestle like that in that saucepan. Okay? And then you're going to basically just bring that water to a boil quick and then turn it right down just to a really low simmer. So you don't want it boiling for any length of time once those lids are in there. All right? So bands do not need sterilization. We, as a matter of course, put them in because it just makes sense. All right? Another thing to think about is, and I may not have gone over it. Did she say it here? I didn't see it. Here, do you want to go forward to the next one, if you wouldn't mind? All right. So, yeah, she didn't say. All right. So anyway, occasionally after many years of usage, these bands will start to put rust. They'll get a little rusty on the inside. If you notice any bands that have rust, then you can't use it any longer. Not for canning. You can use it for a craft. You could use it for storing dry goods or something with a lid or an old lid if you want. But for canning, no good. All right? Because again, that rust, when you go and you put it on that jar, once you put your product in there loose and rest it in that bath, that rust could actually then go into the whole water and everything and make a mess of all of the product that you're trying to can. So food, you're going to basically just prepare the food according to whatever instructions you're following. All right? Use the freshest produce possible. I can't tell you how many ugly, ugly, ugly looking tomatoes we use. And when I say ugly, I mean like maybe a third of it's rotted. Okay? We cut all that rot out and we still put 2/3 into the sauce because it's all fine. All right? So it's just really ripe. You know, amazing flavor. It's remarkable what people think is like not edible and they'll waste the product, and really it's a fine food stuff. And it really just complements all the flavors because it's super ripe. Because you'll have some tomatoes, depending on when you go ahead, let's say if you're going to can tomatoes, you're going to have all different, how do you say, levels of ripeness. Some will be super ripe, but then some may not be quite as ripe, and they're still fine to process. You know, she's saying here, try to use, you know, the ripest or the freshest possibly you can. Freshest, it can't be any fresher that's coming from your garden. But then the degrees of ripeness are going to be, you know, possibly slightly different. And that's a judgment call as you continue to, you know, can and everything. So filling the jars, you're going to remove the jars from the canner. So basically, once they've been in here boiling for the 10 minutes, so let's say, for instance, that now we have our sauce somewhere over here in another pan, you're going to basically take your jar lifter like this, just going to wrap it around that mason jar like this. It's going to be full of hot water, so you get firm grip, and you're just going to tilt that like this so the water drains back into that bath. Okay? Put this on your counter that's on a towel. You're going to take the funnel, which she says sort of, kind of. All right? So you're going to use that funnel on top of whatever size jar you're using, and then you're going to put your food product into that jar. Okay? Using that funnel.
And is that funnel also you've sanitized?
Yeah, so you've washed everything before you've used it, right. Okay. So that's sort of what I said in the get-go. So all the tools, everything you have, it's already washed before you've done anything. Okay? So you put the funnel in your jar, what have you. You're going to fill according to the recipe, leaving the required head space. So required head space, I can tell you from experience, because we've done a lot of canning, typically the required head space is this lower rim on the mason jars. And they all have it. It's about roughly 3/4 of an inch. All right, from the jar. Maybe a little bit, yeah, it's a little shallower sort of on the pint size. But usually that's what it is. But in the recipes, it's going to tell you leave a 1/2 inch head space, or leave a 1/4 inch head space, or 3/4 of an inch head space. It's a guesstimate. You know, you're doing the best that you can because it's really hard to get just enough product in that jar so that you know, you're right at that supposed ideal headspace level. So that's where you're going to use that depressor once you put your foodstuffs in there. You're going to usually, we'll leave this funnel on top, and then I'll use this to go around the sides, all right? So now all the air or whatever supposedly is on the top. We'll take the funnel off, put it on the towel. Now you have this jar, which has some wonderful product which you're going to thoroughly enjoy late winter, let's say, or in the spring. The dilemma is that along this rim, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a small spattering of some foodstuff or something on that rim, all right? The best thing you could do is to have a clean dish towel or something that's dry and wipe that rim. All right, go around it once, make sure it's all dry. Then you're going to basically take your lid with your magnetic lifter out of that saucepan. You're going to place it on that jar, and then just with one finger hold it down, grab your band, and then just finger tight that on. So just finger tight. So you're turning it just till you get some resistance. Once that's happened, you'll use your jar lifter, basically just wrap it around, and then you're going to put it right back into that water bath where you got the empty jar from. Okay? So you're literally taking it from that vessel, putting the food stuff in it, putting it right back in there. Okay?
Do it right away?
What's that?
Do you do it right away?
Yeah. Yep.
Because I usually just do them all.
Oh, you stage it or what have you.
Yeah, and then, because sometimes you have to take some water out, because it gets too full and you put full jars in.
Take some water out. Okay, so I guess the reason why that doesn't happen to us is when we've put the jars in, we've put them in upright and they're full of water to the rim.
Yeah, so am I.
So, and you're saying that then when you put the product in with all the stuff, it's displacing more water than it had when it had the water in it?
Well, because now the jars are full and so the water goes higher, you don't need as much.
Right, because the water won't be going inside the jar.
What's that?
The water's not going inside the jar, so there's more volume of water.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I guess you're right,
So
yeah.
I have to take
Right.
them out.
Yeah.
So I kind of wait to the end and then that way I know how much I can take out.
Yeah, I can tell you that what we've always done is we've always just basically put it right back in there. I mean, at the end of the day, everything tells you should have like 1 to 2 inches above, you know, the rims, if you will, the bands for the jars. So yeah, I guess I didn't think of that. It's never been a problem, so either Susan has done something to take the water out, whether she's ladled it or what, I don't know. That's so funny. Huh?
Yeah, because then you're supposed to wait till it boils, right?
Well, right, so then once you have that full of all your product, now you're going to put the heat back up and you're going to get that to a rolling boil. Once it's in a rolling boil, and we're going to get onto this, with all your product, then you're going to put your timer on for whatever duration it says, and you're going to turn the heat down. You just want a gentle boil. You don't want like a crazy, you know, rambunctious boil going on. All right? So sealed jars, I kind of went over that with the lifter. Finger tight only, place it in the fill jar in the canner. So that you can continue that for all of them. Put them back in the water bath. And then cover the fill jars with water, as I just said a moment ago, roughly 1 to 2 inches. I'm going to have to ask her what she does or how I missed that. So then you're going to remove the processed jars from the water bath or what have you. So once they're all processed, you're just going to use your lifter again, wrap it around that, and then usually we use one of our pool towels. So we'll put them out either on the center island or what have you, and we put all the products, all the jars on top of that towel. All right? We just fill it up. So you'll do that with all of them. And then the trick with that is once you have that processed canning jar, you don't want to touch the band whatsoever. So a lot of people will be like, I'm curious if it got tight or whatever, and it's really hot anyway, so I don't advise it. You know, but they'll like go and just see if it's loose or what have you, or they'll take their finger and they'll try pushing on the lid like that to see if it's sealed. So just leave it alone. What you're going to find is that once you pull all the jars out, you're going to start at some point in time, it could be 2-3 minutes after, you're going to hear a pop, 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 pop. And that's the air basically coming out and then sealing that lid, which is great. If you wanted to count the many pops you hear for how many jars, that works. Or you just wait, as she says here, you know, later the following morning, we just run our hand across it and you can tell whether or not it's sealed. If you hear this, you know, with a jar, that kind of sound, then you know it's not sealed. which means that jar can't go downstairs in the basement or a pantry or a root cellar because it would spoil. So it just has to go in the fridge. Okay? I'm kind of going ahead. But so I kind of went into that for the check seals and then store the jars. So, you know, any jars that have sealed up fine, they can go in your root cellar or in your pantry, depending on where you're going to store them. Any of the ones that haven't sealed, put them in the fridge, use them sooner versus later. Okay? So,
You gonna label?
what's that?
You gonna label?
I didn't say, yeah. So, so as far as labeling or whatnot, I guess we've gotten lazy a little bit on that. You know, we would write typically just, you know, well, actually, we don't even write sauce. She told you guys to do it. So label your food so you know what it is and the date, all right? The date, we usually just do the year. We don't do the month or the day or any of that. We do like if we were to process this year, we'd go 2019 on everything. You know, everything that's down in our pantry right now, it's from like 20, maybe 16, 17 or what have you, up through, you know, 2018 or what have you. But it's pretty evident, really, if you have a sauce versus a whole tomato. I mean, it's day and night. The pickles get a little confusing, you know, whether you're using dill or a bread and butter or some other sort of thing. So I think those really are helpful if you do dill or bread and butter. So another statement from supposedly really good from a foodie, it's the small trivial things in life that makes a human happy, like opening a pickle jar. I get happy from opening tomato soup, I told you, at the tail end of winter. Pickles are all right. I mean, yeah. Holiday season, usually we'll do some gherkin. I don't know if those of you that have ever had gherkin pickles, but they're really very small. So before the pickle gets massive, they're usually super tiny, and they take longer to sort of, how do you say, steep in wonderful goodness. And then we'll process those for holiday pickles. And they're just super, really nice, crisp, wonderful pickles. I mean, that's sort of, I guess I go along with this statement for gherkins. So, if you want to go forward. Yeah. So, pressure canning method. So I brought with me here today, this is a monster pressure cooker. I had started by saying that the reason why we use the pressure cooker is because we literally take, the water bath method takes twice as long as the pressure cooker, all right? The other thing the water bath method requires is a whole lot of water, all right? The pressure cooker, literally, you put maybe 3 inches on the bottom of just about any pressure cooker. That's all the water that the thing needs. So now if you're thinking about fuel consumption, all of that, you know, we have propane because we're out in the sticks. And the propane's expensive by the gallon. So, you know, to heat up this, or say those multiple 50-quart pans with a whole lot of water, takes a really long time, even with the lids. Versus this, 3 inches, way quicker. And the aluminum's just an awesome conductor, so it just goes really fast, okay? So pressure canning method, it's great for all those low acidity foodstuffs, like I had said a moment ago. Cuts the time down by 50%, and I would imagine that's the case with any product. Typically, we're reserving that just for tomato products, so I know empirically it's 50% less time for the tomatoes. I haven't used it for any of my jams or stuff. I usually just use a water bath because those don't get processed for a long time. Tomatoes take a long time in a water bath canning. Usually it's like 45 minutes or what have you. It's a good stint of time. So, so for pressure canning method preparation, you're just going to follow the instructions, and you know whatever the recipe instructions are, beginning through the same, you know, what you did for the canning method or what have you. You're going to do all those same procedures for the canning method there with the water bath initially as you would for the pressure cooker. The only difference comes in when you're actually going to go ahead and process. So then you're going to basically just fill your jars. You'll use your lifter once you have your jars filled with your band loosely on there, or hand tightened, and you'll put them in your pressure cooker. All right? Fill it up, and then you're going to just be really mindful of how you put the lid on. And then I can share the secret with you for any of you out there that pressure cook or use pressure cookers. You want to make sure that the clearance around this seal, around the whole thing, is just the same. As close to constant as you can around the whole rim. So you don't want one side really tight and then the other side really open. All right, so that's the trick to a pressure cooker. It has to be closed evenly, which is why all of these little turn things, you know, are pretty darn adjustable, so you can sort of go with one loose and then you do this one loose. It's sort of like taking lug nuts off a car. That's what I think anyway while I do it. So the preparation's the same as the water canning method initially. Once you're putting it in a pressure cooker, then it changes. So you're going to process and remove the jars according to the manufacturer's directions half the time. I mean, literally. That's a big time saver. Especially if you have a lot of products, a lot of product that you're trying to do. So cool and store the process jars, same as if utilizing a water bath canner. So everything's the same, except for the fact that the time's shorter, and then this little sort of pressure relief thing, there's different ratings. So there's like 5 pounds of pressure, 10 pounds, and then 15 pounds. So depending on what it is that you're trying to pressure cook, the instructions are going to tell you that you need to do it at 5, 15, or 10. And then you're just putting that on that little, gateway there, and then you're going to see steam come out of that. And it's going to start to rumble or rattle, and then you sort of know, depending on, as long as the steam's been coming out for a good while, there's nuances to it. You'll know when it's ready, sort of like, it's not boiling water like this is, where you're turning it down, and then you're setting the timer in the water canner. On the pressure cooker, you're going to have basically a steady steam thing coming up out of this, and it just needs to be steady. It can't be intermittent. So once you have that steady stream of steam, then you can go ahead and start your timer for this. All right? And what happens is, ideally, it's going to kind of, you say burp, kind of do one of those things, and that burp should be at like a consistent time frame. You have to sort of pressure cook to experience it. But the burp and everything is all a function of the size of the pressure cooker and everything that you're doing. All right, so a little more complicated, but well worth the investment, especially if you're trying to cut your time factor down. Because if you get into canning and everything, your feet absolutely kill you by the end of the day, and your back hurts. I mean, I'm not trying to discourage all of you from doing canning. It's just, those are the cold, hard facts. The food's awesome, but boy, it's sort of labor intensive going through it as well, okay? So, some tips for success. Reuse the jars. So you can use the jars over and over and over again, okay? As long as there's no nicks, scratches, or cracks. So, you just really need to inspect them thoroughly before you go ahead and commit to washing the vessel and then using it for the next time you're going to go ahead and do some canning. Okay? Bands and the lids, I had already said a moment ago. So the lids you can never reuse. Well, you can't reuse the lids for canning. You could save the lids for storing dry goods or crafts or, things like that. So you can reuse them. You can repurpose them. You just can't use them again for canning. So, we have sort of a bag in our pantry of lids, which we've used from canning before, which we then use for other things. All right, but we don't use them for canning. Now, the rims, as I said earlier, you can use the rims up until they get rusty. Once they're rusty, then you can repurpose them, but you can't use them for, any more canning. Okay? Questions on that? Any of you guys? No? So recipes, use only recipes from reputable canning sources. So Ball Canning, B-A-L-L, been around for like ever. Really great reference for recipes. You can't go wrong with the Ball Canning book. All right, it goes through everything. It goes through your fruits, it goes through your vegetables, it goes into the meats. I mean, it really covers the whole gamut of any canning possibly that you'd want to do. All right. It speaks typically, it usually goes over the water bath method. It isn't going to go over the pressure cooker as much, but lo and behold, with your pressure cooker, you always have, it's in my bag. But anyway, you're going to have an instruction book, and it's going to tell you how long to process, say, your sauce for, or what have you. All right? And then you're going to look at that, and you're like, oh my God, it's only 20 minutes. Yes. Versus 40 minutes. Okay? Right? Yeah, well, fortunately, you do a great job of, you know, forwarding all the stuff. It'll reconnect.
Oh,
Yeah.
There you go.
So some seasoned tomato sauce. So I brought these recipes. I don't know, did you print them out in your packet?
They are in the packet.
Oh, yeah, all right. So, I mean, I printed some out here too. I'll leave these with you. But,
do you need tomato soup?
what's that?
I wanna make tomato soup.
Oh, I know I didn't do that, but you know what? I can probably forward it along. And I'll leave you those too.
Thank you.
So seasoned tomato sauce, preserve the fresh tomatoes with the, you know, incredible flavor and everything that comes along with them. And then certainly bread and butter pickles. So just two great recipes that you can go ahead and do for all of your canning. Yeah, so if you want to just advance that.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, that's all right.
I was reading your
Yeah, that's right. So seasoned tomato sauce, so you can see here, this is sort of like one of the ones that we use. You know, this is a big recipe. All right, so you just par it down. You know what I mean? She probably got this from the Ball Canning book or what have you. And you know, if you put up a lot of tomato plants, then you can easily, gosh, 45 pounds of tomatoes is like nothing. So you know, so you have all those ingredients usually from your fresh garden. The onions you have, the garlic. We always plant a winter crop of garlic, which we harvest in the spring. So there's plenty of garlic. You know, so you gather all those ingredients ahead of time, and then you're just going to follow the instructions step by step as far as washing the tomatoes, drain them, remove the core and the blossom ends. So that's where you want to go ahead and then really pay attention to the tomatoes. If you notice anything that's sort of black or, you know, not good on the tomato, then you're going to cut that out, okay? Another thing, our noses are amazing, our olfactory senses. So you can basically have a tomato and it looks really ugly, like a portion of it's rotten, okay? So we'll cut out that rotten piece or what have you, and then we'll take whatever is remaining and put it up to our nose. And like like a healthy tomato, a good tomato, smells clean, like it smells awesome. But if there's any bad in there, it just leaves an odor. So we usually, you know, we'll cut everything out and then we just give it a nose test. That's what we've done for the last 14 years, which has worked well for us. All right? So she just goes over here the directions, how you'd go ahead and do it. You know, if you want to go ahead and do a seasoned tomato sauce. What's nice about doing a seasoned tomato sauce is, as I told you in the get-go earlier on, you know, if let's say we want to do a bouillabaisse, I think that's what you call it, or bolognese. Sorry, bolognese. You know, we'll usually just take a pound of beef out, you know, season it or what have you in the skillet, brown it, and then we'll open up, you know, one of our jars or 2 quarts and we'll toss it on top. And then you have a wonderful pasta sauce, you know, right then and there. Which,
What's the reason for the lemon?
so yeah, so you can see here where you're going to go ahead and bottle lemon juice or citric acid. So that's the preservative. All right? So if you were to go ahead and say, this is where you're going to follow the instructions. So once you put your product, I should actually tell you this because this is an easier way to do it. Before you put your product in here, you're going to go ahead and you're going to add the appropriate amount of lemon juice to this, or maybe a little bit of salt if you want that as well. Then you're going to add your food stuff in here with the funnel. Then you already know that everything's in here in order to allow that product not to go bad, all right, in storage. So the lemon juice is basically the preservative for that tomato sauce.
How much lemon juice?
She didn't say.
I think the recipe
It's-
is telling you.
It's like a
I've never
teaspoon or
used lemon
something.
juice. I just did salt. You know,
Yeah,
I do salt
yeah,
to season it.
Yeah, no, I would say that I want to say it's like a teaspoon of lemon juice is
Okay.
what's striking my mind. And then for salt, I think we put like a half a teaspoon or something.
I put it in the recipe.
Yeah.
You
No.
did, okay.
I know that when we do it, or when my wife makes the sauce, she'll season the sauce as she's doing it. And then we're always adding the lemon juice and a little bit of salt to this as well.
I read that in a recipe I did
Yeah.
last year, and I thought, oh, I don't think I did that the year before
Yeah,
that. But
yeah.
I used it so quick, I only made like 4 jars.
Right. And it could also be the fact that since we go ahead and she does that added step, maybe that's where she thinks, you know, she has more confidence in using the product, you know, at a longer date or what have you, more likely than not. Because she is adding that citric acid as well as that additional sodium, above and beyond the sodium that she's put in the preparation for the sauce. So, all right, so if you want to go to the bread and butter pickles, those are beyond simple. Just,
Oh,
sorry. I think that'll be the last. Tech.
Thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I'll see what college we got there.
Ah, there, good. So bread and butter pickles, pretty darn simple. Literally, again, you're just gonna follow those ingredients, all right, as far as how you're gonna do it. Usually we'll do our bread and butter pickles, we'll use a 5-gallon bucket, food grade bucket, you know what I'm saying? And we'll put all of that stuff in there. Certainly for the gherkins as well, it'll be separate. But we just put it in there, let it soak and rest for, a good bit of time. She's saying here the directions: combine cucumber, onion slices, large bowl, layer vegetables with salt, cover with ice cubes, let stand 1.5 hours, drain, rinse, drain again, combine remaining ingredients in large stock pan, bring to a boil, and return to a boil. Yeah. I would say that she didn't give you the whole recipes, all the recipes with that, or like the rest of that. But as I said to you, you're going to want to just definitely, if you don't have that ball canning jar or something like that, and probably you don't even need the book with the online recipes and everything, today, you could probably get all those, materials online as well as to the final steps to those recipes. So, hopefully, there was a lot of information here, so I'm sorry. Hopefully you all found it informative. If you want to just advance to the final, I just think she did some whatever notes at the end. Yeah, so she just did some resources here. So Ball Blue Book, Guide to Home Canning and Freezing, Fresh Preserving, and the National Center for Food Preservation. As far as that really gives you guidelines as to how long you should store foods and stuff like that if you are going to go ahead and do canning. Okay? Ken was? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Ken had asked me before we started the presentation, what our thoughts were on freezing produce and food. Usually when we do put up our garden and we just have a plethora of product, and let's say we've done all the canning we need for our whole tomatoes or our sauce, and the tomatoes are still coming. And maybe it's a year I'm out raising hogs, so I can't put them to the pigs. We will then take the tomatoes, rinse them or wash them, and then put them in freezer bags and freeze them. And then we'll use those fresh tomatoes or frozen tomatoes, put them in our Vitamixer to sort of make almost like a tomato soup or a pre-sauce thing with some of them. And we'll use that in the creation of the sauce.
And I'll use to drop them in your soup.
Oh, nice.
And
Yeah, leave them whole or what have you.
And then you cut them.
Yeah, that's a nice idea too.
Yeah.
Yeah, great idea. Yep. We're not fans of doing it. What we found is that whenever you're trying to freeze produce, it just doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the same crunch flavor. It's just it gets freezer burn. It just something there is missing. It's not nearly as wonderful. We have always traditionally frozen our string beans in sort of so. And you'd see if you were to get the Ball book or look at recipes, you want to blanch your string beans, so you're basically just trying to stop, the further creation of sugars and everything in them. And then you're going to let all of those dry, so you can suck the air out, use those vacuum bag things, to put them in, or you can then use that water, which you blanched them in, you can put your string beans in freezer containers, pour some of that fluid in there, and then freeze that, as long as you're leaving enough headspace for ice expansion. All right. Either cases, string beans are always sort of silly and not crunchy or whatever with that whenever you're doing the freezing. It's just so different. She'll do dilly beans, which is sort of like a spicy bean, sort of like a bread and butter. And we'll open that up and it's as crisp as like it just came out of the garden. It's just so much better. We've never canned string beans. I wish we did. We probably just get so exhausted that we just think, it's just not worth it. And usually if we're doing string beans, we'll do a shepherd's pie, which means they're going to be cooked anyway, and it's like, say a beef stew, or it's just not high on her priority, or even mine for that matter. So, any questions for those of you here that are in attendance, or any of you for out there? Don't know?
Have you done anything ever with mincemeat?
So we have never pressure cooked any meats,
Okay.
or I've never done any meat whatsoever. I aspire to make how do you say, holiday venison sausage or holiday sausage or stuff, but we haven't. No.
Okay.
So I've never
Just
used
curious.
that little thing that you put at the bottom.
Oh,
Me neither.
And I've only had one jar break on me, and that's because I think it had a crack.
Crack.
I didn't see it.
yeah.
But I didn't know that.
So yeah, you should have ventilation on the bottom of your pan for your water canner, in every case. Yeah, it's gonna really decrease the likelihood that you're gonna have any sort of a break or anything in there. You know, my wife was away somewhere, I forget, she was gone for like a week, and there were bushels of tomatoes that had to be processing, so I said, you know what, honey, I'll do them in your absence or whatever. And I did them that summer. Now, we have old friends of ours that are much senior than us, so I called Dina and Peter on a couple occasions to try to get me out of hot water, literally. But you know, what happened with me was I didn't inspect one of these half-gallon, containers quite so well. So I had processed a bunch of sauce, and I put them in the water thing, because then we didn't have this. And anyway, about 30 minutes into the boil, I heard a crack, and I was just like, no. So I looked like this, and it's like all tomato water, and I'm just like, come on. Now, that never happened with my wife doing it. Okay, so that's when I called Dina, and I'm like, Dina, what do I do? She says, I hate to tell, just let it boil, doesn't matter, just let it boil, finish the time or what have you, and then you keep your fingers crossed that all the other ones in there, the seals didn't get affected or anything, because that's the problem, because now the water and everything is contaminated. So she says it's a bit of a crapshoot, but she says there's no point in tearing it all out or stopping. So she says just boil it for the 40 minutes, and then take out the ones that didn't break, and then gently dump it in your sink or whatever, take it out, you need to wash it all out, do all that. Fortunately, all of those sealed, even with that, that break, but it was just a nightmare.
I gotta go buy myself one of those, I guess.
Yeah,
Me too.
and that, for me, that happened so many years back, I don't even know if, I may have not had this in there, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then maybe that's what did it, because, we do a fair bit of sauces in half gallons. So you figure if you're putting all of those in there, that's pretty snug. And then the water. So there isn't a whole lot of place for the heat to dissipate. And it just, one of them was cracked or, weak or what have you. And the whole bottom was like a perfect circle, the whole bottom. Poof. So I picked it up like this, but then all the product, it just sloshed out. Yeah, anyway. Yeah.
You use the rack now all the time.
Yeah, you and your wife, you guys use the rack all the time.
No,
Or we
that's-
do.
you-
Oh yeah, no, we use the rack all the
All the
time.
time, okay.
Whether we're using the pressure cooker, whether we're using the water canning method, or whether we're using the small steamer that we have. We put that rack in there all the time now.
Okay.
Yeah, without failure. Usually you can get like a cookie rack or what have you, or a small little, rack thing. They may be oval. I don't know if you can find them round. Usually you can with some canning stuff. But before we got this, my wife had sort of an oval one, which sort of fit in here, and it got most of the jars. Do you know what I mean? We did that for a while.
That's really nice.
Yeah. So this with the pressure cooker, they sell you one. You get 2 of these with the cooker, and the reason being is you basically can do 2 quarts on top of one another in this. So you can do like 8 quarts on one and then 8 quarts on the other, so 16 quarts. Whereas in this, you're lucky if you get 8. 8 and 40, or 16 and 20. It's like, if you're doing like 200 or whatever, it's a no-brainer. Yeah. So, yep. Right. No, yeah, sure. So great questions. Any others, or you guys are all good?
That's good.
Yeah, so thank you. I hope you found it informative. I hope I didn't walk too far away from the video. Thank you, everyone. Yes.